Hello and welcome back. We're starting with the second panel. Again, my name is Abra Johnson. I am a member of HoneyPotPerformance. Thank you for being here. If you just came and you're not sure where you are, this is the Chicago Black Social Cultural Mapping Project, and we are in the process of archiving the development of house music here in Chicago. So I just wanted to tell you that this project is a collaboration between HoneyPotPerformance, Actively Archiving, and the Dance Music Archiving Foundation. So this is a collaboration with multiple organizations to cultivate, to map, to store, to save, and to share the history of house music. So you are joining us for the second panel, which is From the South to the North, DJs Building Careers and Maintaining House Culture on the 90s North Side. So with us today, we have panelists and DJs Javon Jackson, DJ Freak and the Diz, moderated by DJ Duane Powell. So I'm just gonna go briefly over your bios, if that's okay, and then you can introduce yourselves. The moderator, Duane Powell, entered the world of street promotions in 1985, pounding the pavement, promoting events for prominent DJs within Chicago's burgeoning house music scene, starting with Lil Louis. By 1990, Duane had done street promotions and served as marketing manager and consultant for many clubs and DJs, including the historic Powerhouse. As a promoter, he launched the Sound Rotation brand in 1999, further cultivating the underground soul scene in Chicago, giving many acts their performance debut in the market, and served as a go-to source, consultant, and liaison between artists and venues. Thank you, Duane. Panelists Terrence Sinclair Allen, aka DJ Freak. I hope you don't mind me reading your whole name. Has held a strong local presence among the Chicago dance music scene since the early 90s. Freak has played events throughout the US and parts of Europe. He has played alongside several prolific players in the dance music world, from Gene Farris to Felix the House Cat to Larry Heard to Cashmere to Derek Carter. The list goes on and on. These and other shows over 25 years have shaped him into a one-of-a-kind dance music selector and personality. Thank you for being here. Sorry. After starting to DJ at the age of 12, our panelist, DJ Javon Jackson, became a firm believer and proponent of the art of the DJ. With his professional career starting in 1990, he soon got his first residency at the now legendary Red Dog nightclub, which we heard DeRoe talk about earlier. His career soon skyrocketed with subsequent residencies at several well-known Chicago clubs, such as Shelter, Voyeur, Smart Bar, Crowbar, Zentra, Betty's Blue Star Lounge, Liquid Kitty, Le Passage, Super Lounge, as well as stints at Mad Bar and Harry's Velvet Room, which coupled his DJ skills with the added responsibilities of talent buyer and manager, and that can only happen in Chicago. Thank you for being here. Panelist Dwayne Washington, AKA the Diz, DJ Diz. Musical influences started at home, where his mother's love of jazz led him to pursue the saxophone for many years. His DJ beginnings were about whatever he could get his hands on, like disco and old school break records, inherited from family members. When he was 14, his older brother took him to the Music Box, where Diz witnessed the true potential of house music to affect people's emotions and bring them together on a collective journey. He's been striving to do that ever since, and in the process has become a faithful participant in the music, the culture, and the times. Thank you, Diz. Thank you for being here. So we're gonna turn this over to Duane Powell.
How's everybody doing? Thank you all for being here in this schizophrenic weather and everything. I'm very excited to have three DJs next to me that I admired for 25 years or so, especially, starting with this brother here. Just to kind of recap, being in the house music scene, the 80s, watching it transition in the 90s, watching it be. There's a period to me where between the late 80s and the 90s where support of local house music was not as strong. At this point, everything became classic, 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 classic. And at some point, I remember my crew just kind of getting bored with that energy, and I always wanted to search and find, new sounds, new music, and new ideas. And so we started going like kind of partying on a lot of some of the at the gay clubs, because like the gay community as they were in the 70s when they began the idea of cultivating house culture in the late 70s, they were always about newness, and that led us to going to like places like the bistro and things of that nature. But then I ended up going to this loft party of the Northside up here, and this brother here was playing, and it was just like, whoa, yeah, what's this? What's going on? And we started hanging up here, and yeah, so I don't even want to get into. I want to kind of tell their own stories, but basically, I'm just singing praises right now because because of them, I honestly believe that house culture lived and survived throughout the 90s. If it wasn't for them, it would not still be happening. So I want to thank y'all for being here. First of all, Javon and I have known each other for quite some time, and I know you from the South Side, but I actually don't know if you brothers, what side of town are you originally from?
Well, I grew up in Hyde Park. I grew up in Hyde Park, and then moved to the suburbs for a little bit, Hickory Hills area, and then moved back to Chicago when I got out of high school, and just kind of kept it moving from there. Learned house from my brother, partying and stuff. But yeah, Chicago.
I'm originally from 79th near the lakefront, but then moved a little bit. So I'm originally a South Sider, probably until like the mid 90s or whatever. Then it became kind of a back and forth thing, splitting time between up there and down there or whatever, so.
Yeah, I'm originally from 101st and May, somewhere in high school. My parents and I moved out to South Holland, Illinois, 171st and Jeffrey. Graduated high school, went away to University of Illinois for a year, flunked out. Actually worked at my first nightclub, a place called Chester Street, a gay bar, and I was a bar back. Came home to Chicago, hooked up with Diz, and started playing up here, playing 1355 and what was the one we were talking about just the other night? 1471. Yeah, and Red Dog. Red Dog had opened, maybe a couple years after that, or it just opened. It was still 2 o'clock bar. 92. Yeah, 2 o'clock. Mm-hmm. And then we hooked up again because you came up with Rush. And Rush started playing undergrounds and raves up here. So, like 90, yeah, because we all left about the same time, or I could figure. You was the first.
Yeah, you were definitely first, because
Yeah, you were the
I
first.
remember not even being, Medusa's was still open. I'm thinking it had to be 91-ish. I was 17, and I went to 1466, I remember, because it was up those stairs, and I don't know who was doing security, but they weren't letting anyone over or under 18 in, and somehow we got in. I remember you were playing Stevie Wonder, and I was like, okay, I never really been to anything like this, kind of like your story, just kind of being bored, moving around, coming up here and just kind of seeing stuff. Because first time I had come around here was 1990, and Red Dog wasn't there yet, but I had a friend that lived around the corner from here, and we were going to Medusa's or whatever. But Medusa's, closed in 92, But I remember that party that I saw you at well before I even knew any of those people. I don't even know how I was connected, how I ended up there, no idea, but that was probably my first kind of deal onto the Milwaukee scene. So.
Yeah, hello. Okay, so I'm the grandfather of the panel. Is that what's going on?
Well, if you think about it, nowadays we're contemporaries, but when you're 17, difference between 17 and 19 is humongous, actually. So it's like we don't deal with 17-year-olds. Like, we're too cool for that. You know what I mean? Like, we put in more time, like, you know, as it should be. You know, can't just walk in off the street. You know, it just.
Okay, yeah, I could dig it.
But seriously, when we talked about this, putting this together, because we do feel like the 90s is not mentioned whenever they're documenting house history. Somehow there's this black hole that's the 90s, and then this skips back into some sort of reinvention. And I'm like, well, no, there was a whole culture that was happening. When I think about the 90s, when we talk about putting this together, you were the first person I thought about.
Well, when you think about the 90s, especially within the music, there was a transition period where a lot of the dance music was pretty much in the forefront on the mainstream. You know, you had a lot of, you know, really good mainstream, like, you know, Masters at Work were just starting to get really, you know, big. So, I mean, in the clubs, I mean, that was pretty much where it was prevalent. But then soon after that wave, it sort of shifted to more of the underground. And I guess that's where we kind of connected.
Because, I mean, if you remember, like, when it came down to, like, the Masters at Work, then it come down to that, what they would call a new music, at that time, what was known as the house community, which was predominantly Southside, wasn't fucking with that music.
Sure.
Again, it was all classics, disco, or some kind of, you know, acid track or something like that. But as far as that goes, it wasn't, they wasn't really dealing with that. And then it got to the point where they started even considering some of the tracks that we liked, that was acid or how, they started considering that to be techno.
Right.
And you guys kind of changed that idea for a lot of people. When I see people like playing all this stuff now, I have a DJ that I knew who played strictly disco until he came to one of the events and he heard a Masters at Work joint that you were playing. And that was like, he said after that, he had actually called one of his boys and told him he can come and get his disco record. Like, he wasn't playing disco anymore, he wanted to play this music. Which I'm like, why you get your records away? But
He threw his records away?
so for you being the grandfather,
Yeah.
the godfather, whatever you want to call it, this
Lord.
panel, how did this whole Milwaukee corridor and the loft parties and everything begin for you?
Well, for me, a woman I was dating at the time, she lived in Oak Park, and we were frequenting, you know, Shelter and, you know, Kaboom even, you know, a few other clubs in the city, Alcazar, more of the underground side, the city here on the north side. And we just thought, you know, I mean, we can do this shit. You know, we don't have to, you know, be in the clubs and you know, just worry about the whole pomp and circumstance that the clubs bring. You know, we wanted to kind of provide a little bit of a different avenue for people to have a good time and, you know, drink, I don't want to say, but do your drugs and, you know, whatever you're gonna do, you know, just having fun. And we just thought we could do it better. And so we got this place up on Milwaukee, 1466. It was an empty loft building, 3 levels. And it just pretty much started from there. It started at one party, and it just kind of snowballed into a 2-year, you know, monthly kind of thing, you know. So, I mean, they started out as rent parties because, you know, we were all broke in the 90s. But it just kind of snowballed from there.
Because, yeah, you have to remember, we were all like 20, 21. Something like that. So we're not even thinking of this as a standpoint of any kind of just wanted.
Just have fun.
Yeah. So
Outcasts.
like, had you been spending like before that Southside wise or anything?
Not in the, you know, not at any events or anything like that. I mean, I was just a dancer, initially, and I just met people in clubs, and I mean, I always had turntables, I had bought turntables when '85. Actually, my mama bought me turntables in '85. And I just, my love for the music, yeah, right? I give some ups to my moms, but yeah, it just started from, the love of music and, being turned out, by BMX and KKC and, I mean, that was kind of my initiation into the music,
I mean, and you really think about, if you go back to what you were saying about how people kind of got stuck in the kind of time warp, late 80s, think 88, 89, it was just kind of a lull, and it seemed like maybe not a lot of music was coming out, but also that was when BMX went off the air, period. So people just lost that connection to the music and didn't really know, where to kind of turn to or whatever. So, I mean, thank goodness for KKC, new music. I mean, I was hearing Glenn Underground stuff in '89, like, just what is this, and to see him about, so it's just crazy. Like
with Glenn, some people are just discovering that he's a producer.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Shit, I remember when, with the Masters at Work thing, cats on the South Side were telling me, that's not house. That's not even house. And that Blaze, what was that Blaze? Because they did People Hold On, and they had just started doing like the stuff on Shelter and what was that song? Sajada, Fantasy. And cats on the South Side were like, y'all not even playing house. That's not even house. And now that they back again, they like, man, you better get up on some of this Louis Vega and some of this Josh Milan.
But with that conversation, because
man.
like we bringing up like Masters of Work and Blaze and other things, but there was quite a few Chicago producers who were producing in those years that wasn't getting support from the community, which kind of, again, like I said, led us to find these other spaces that was providing this kind of music, Shelter and, and then the loft parties. But how did it become, because at some point it seemed that the loft party got transitioned into like raves?
I think a few things happened. Well, I think a lot of parties around here just stopped because the cops just shut everything down. Like, it was just a constant, at least us being younger and really not knowing, just seemed like, oh, this daily, blah, 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 blah. But at least for me, I had turned 21. So, I mean, once I started playing in clubs, it just was, for me, no. And simultaneously, like you're saying, the rave culture just kind of took off. And the bombast of those parties just took people's interest.
The rave culture had a lot to do with white suburban culture too, because it had been broadcast to those kids through, coming out of London. Acid started here, it went to London, and then they had their, what was that, summer of '91, the summer of love, or whatever they call it. And then Acid came back, and it came back to the suburban white kids. I felt like the underground parties were largely urban kids, and then the rave parties started with mostly suburban kids, and then you had some urban kids who were there, largely the ones throwing the parties and the DJs. Rave culture was almost a little more commercial culture. It was a little different than the underground thing, but they did all kind of run, at least for me, they ran concurrently. There were nights where I would play a club that closed at 2 and then hit a loft and play there and then go out to the suburbs at 6 a.m. and finish up a rave. So, like,
it just seemed at one point, like you said, the more, the parties that were urban culture got, there's all kind of rave laws and all that kind of stuff that took place, but it seems like at that point is when the kind of urban parties dissipated. And then suddenly there was a time where I remember you were known for like being a rave DJ, even though Javon has always been historically a house DJ.
I lucked out. I played raves, clubs, and undergrounds. If you had decks, I think I can play.
So do you think though that at some point you kind of got pigeonholed? Because there's, of course, there's this conversation now. There's the Northside DJ, there's the Southside DJ. And all of that, and you guys have definitely have been like labeled the kings of the North Side, even though y'all all from the South Side. Do you feel like eventually you got pigeonholed in a way? Any of you?
For me, I lucked out by playing raves, undergrounds, and nightclubs. I got to play a few different styles of music. With raves, I got to play harder, more techno stuff. Underground parties, I got to play more underground stuff. And in nightclubs, you got to play a different style. So I really got to spread out and never really felt pigeonholed, except for the idea of he's a Northside DJ. You know, like, other than that, musically, no, actually the great part of the Northside is musical freedom.
Yeah, I don't think I really ever thought about being pigeonholed, just because really after the loft party, things were over and the club started happening. I mean, I was working all the time, so I didn't really think pigeonholed from what, because every weekend I just never really thought of that. It was just more so that in any opportunity, if someone steps to you, you know, and you think is somewhat legit, and you know everything is square, then you just go ahead and do it, you know.
Sorry, I guess where I'm coming from is that, again, when we talked about you saying, you know, DJs and people who view themselves as the pioneers or gatekeepers or whatever of house culture and community and whatever, kind of even saying what you playing is not house, and thus that's where it begins the story of not including this culture, not including this in the history of house, when, you know, if it were not for that era, we wouldn't have gotten to the other side. You know what I mean? So I guess when I was coming from that standpoint of, almost, it's almost to me personally, it's a level of disrespect. Okay.
Yeah, I agree. Because, I mean, I think, I mean, we came up, you know, listening and playing classics, and you know, I mean, what you heard at, you know, Lil Lewis parties and at the Music Box and the Power Plant, Powerhouse, and all those places, you know, it was predominantly like older stuff being played, and we kind of came into the fray where, you know, we were privy to that, but we also wanted to kind of take it forward. I feel like, you know, I mean, you guys apparently don't feel this way, but I mean, I felt like I kind of got, you know, everybody was like, well, Diz plays techno. I'm like, I don't play techno, I play house music. Yeah, it's all encompassing in my brain, you know. But I mean, what was the question?
I mean, I look at DJ, I look at DJ Rush. He's, you know, he's
Right.
known as one of the biggest techno artists.
Indeed.
You know, and that's based on the house tracks that he
Sure.
created.
Yeah.
You know,
Which is house to us, you know what I mean? But yeah, can kind of get put into a category. I mean, people just feel safe putting things into categories, I mean, unfortunately.
But I mean, with the events you guys were a part of and spun, to me, that's when I started really experiencing house from a multicultural aspect.
Evolutionary,
Yeah.
you know, in my mind, you know. I mean, I can finish your point, I'm sorry. Yeah, I mean, it just kind of evolved, you know. I mean, it was no stopping it from, you know, its inception, you know, which were, you know, disco and what have you, and it was only natural that you're going to encompass, you know, I mean, when I think where house has come, well, how far it's come, you know, from what we initially know, we all know what house is, you know, from the disco side of it to where it is now. I mean, I'm rambling and I'm tripping, but ask another question. I'm sorry, I'm tripping.
You good. You are good. Trust me. This is really a conversation.
Yeah.
So, I mean, because there are people in the room I know personally who, you know, their foray into this culture was through parties that you guys were a part of. So to me, that's why I think it's a level of disrespect from the standpoint of it didn't end somewhere. There was crops of DJs that birthed new generations of house party goers and people who into the culture. And I think you guys were three of the guys that were really at the forefront. And then, you know, more people, Spencer Kinsey and Cashmere and,
God bless.
Gene Ferris.
Well, those were the guys. Yeah, I mean Spencer Kinsey. I mean what Derek Carter was doing in this neighborhood just changed a lot of people. And really toward the end of the era, when Miles Maeda came into this neighborhood and was starting to do events, it was just on a, at least for me, was just on a completely different level. It was like, whoa, okay, like it's really moved, at least for me, because I was young. So what he was doing was next level for me. My transition was slow from playing a lot of older stuff, because that's just all, I knew, and whatever, you just pick up on music wherever you can get it, so.
I always liked the fact that you had to be able to mix to come over here. You actually had to have a skill set. You couldn't.
Indeed.
That sounded like a little dig, but okay.
It is a dig. It is a dig. It is a dig.
Fuck it. You know what I'm saying? You had to be able to mix. There was a high bar set for DJs up here when we got up here. People would get mad at you if you couldn't, if it didn't matter, because in the end everybody's playing the same songs. You know what I'm saying? We shopping at the same stores. We shopping off the same walls. We shopping from the same buyers. So we're not varying that much with the music, to be honest with you, and of what we're playing on the dance floor. And what really set DJs apart up here was the fact that you could mix. You could actually do something with those records. The transition became.
Well, no, it still was about a level of energy too. It still was about it. Everybody, mixing is fine, but there was still a level of energy that you guys would bring.
'Cause people would get excited because of your blend.
Well, there were
we used to
blends
get
too,
excited.
because we're talking all newer music as well. So you have the capability actually to blend.
I
as
wish to
opposed-
God there was footage, because we used to get excited for Javon, because Javon was the dancing DJ. That would get overly excited when he played songs that he loved, and he would move and whatever, to the point where he would bump his own records. Because he would be jacking that hard while he's playing.
I got that from Diz.
Yeah. So if we walk away with anything from this panel, that Diz is the grandfather of house culture in Wicker Park. He's not claiming that. We ain't gonna claim that for him either. But we do give you daps, because again, like I said, we all took your lead coming up here. I ended up moving into and living in 1355. So yeah. Now I've lost my train of thought. This is what happens when you.
Well, also too, like at least what we were doing, it kind of gave maybe you guys, because it seemed like we just connected right away through. I don't even know if we met up here or, well, some of my people, your people, because y'all were doing Reactor, and I missed that somehow, because Medusa was still open when Reactor was open, so I just never went and just. But you guys kind of came in, Rush and Craig, and it was like, well, if y'all doing it, then you guys kind of had easy access to be able to do something. No one really cared about, if you knew this person or you knew this person, just come on in and just, these are the people to make it happen, So there's a lot of connectivity and easy access to be able to do stuff just from.
So with that, did you guys, because with all you being from Southside, did you eventually just kind of move from the Southside to this area as you were actually playing as well?
Yeah, I moved up here. Like I said before, I moved up here because I was, pretty much spending a lot of time at Shelter and, hanging out with Derek Carter, Mark Farina, and it just seemed like a natural transition for me. I was, like I said, I was out on the South Side, so, that train ride.
And you're on the South
that
Side
train
again
ride
now,
was,
right?
huh?
You're back on the South Side, right?
Yeah. I live right around the corner from the mosque.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, but yeah, that train ride was a bitch. I didn't have a car, so it was just natural for me to end up trying to find a place up here, and it happened.
Man, listen, I don't even talk about train rides because I'm the one. Well, Javon was too, but I was always from 116th Street. So imagine me when it was the Douglas. It wasn't the red line and the green line and all that. It was the. I forgot what they called the trains back then. It was the train that went from the South Side That train went from the south side to the west side, from the 95th to west.
But it was like the green line.
Right. At the time, though, it was the train from 95th went to the west side.
To the west side, it went down
And
to.
the
Oh, it was
train-
before it went to Howard?
Yes.
Lord, you was on
The
the train
Howard,
then?
the Howard train went on the Green Line track. So imagine me partying
downtown.
with y'all or partying in Maywood
Oh, man.
and living on 116th Street and have to get back to 116th Street that night on the train. So
Man, half
yeah.
your night was on the train.
Yeah, yeah.
Lord.
So, but yeah, I didn't move here. I didn't move this way until like the mid or later 90s. And I am moved in 1355. But anyway, we just telling stories at this point.
Well, I got up here I moved downtown first, at West Loop. I lived on Randolph and Green, right across the street from the Warehouse Part 2. You remember that? You used to come practice. Y'all came over there.
Well, no, I
that was
remember
the
it
place
because-
where Derek lived and
Yeah,
lived above
yeah,
me.
Red Nail was.
And,
yeah.
then I moved over to Crystal, right off of Damon and Division, with Darlene in a coach house. And we were there for many years.
So years before I was DJing, I've always collected music. I would go with Javon's house and actually literally curate my own mixtapes where I would bring my music and tell him to mix it.
Play it. Yeah, that's pretty awesome.
See, you had to know how to mix.
So yeah. I just lost my train of thought again. I'm sorry, y'all. We having
This
conversation.
is a
we had
conversation
fun.
amongst, yeah, it's all good.
Oh yeah, yeah. So, because the one thing we noticed, and even talking about like with the mapping and everything, what we call this black migrations, because a lot of what happens in house culture seems to mimic the Great Migration, in terms of the South starting south, coming north, and like you said, you personally moving back south. I've also noticed that it seems that every area that was raw with these spaces and with these things and where house culture was cultivated were all the spaces that was gentrified, as if they were following us.
Yeah, well, you see what this neighborhood, yeah, but you see what this neighborhood has turned into. I mean, it initially was, Latino families, and I mean, there, it wasn't multicultural around here. It was like a burrito spot and a couple of furniture spots. I mean, we were just in this area because, of the loft access,
Because I remember this end.
I mean,
looking-
Division used to be nasty.
this whole
It used to
street
be,
was
and
filled-
now
I remember
it used
this
to be
looking
furniture
disgusting.
stores.
Serious.
This end used to remind me of like Inglewood Mall.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. Yeah. I mean, it's certainly come a long
not
way. I mean,
safe.
people saw the potential, especially, from so many people migrating over here to party. It was like, and then when Red Dog opened, I mean, they just kind of took what we were doing from the loft space to, turn it into a club pretty much, because, I mean, that space had been unused for years. I mean, they just were running the bar on the main floor. Yeah.
So Red Dog.
Yep.
Okay. Before I can even question, he's all ready to answer. So. No, but Red Dog was definitely ended up being after we, bounced from underground party, loft party to loft party, shut down to shut down. Red Dog definitely ended up being a mainstay for years. And I remember both of you having residencies there. I don't remember if you ever played there.
I probably played there maybe 3 or 4 times through the years, but yeah. No, never a residency.
Yeah, let's talk about Red Dog.
Well,
Yeah,
at least
I
for
mean-
me, like, the first real times I was going in, and I'm not sure if I wasn't 21. I was 19, 20. I used to go with my roommate at the time, who was this guy named Mike Pierce, who actually was a DJ. He was a resident DJ at Red Dog. So I used to
haven't
get
heard
in
that
with
name in
him, but I used to
forever.
go to the Boom Boom Room,
The Monday nights.
the Hi-Fi Boom Boom Room, and that helped me. I really never been fully, or at least it wasn't that the whole homosexual culture wasn't in my face so aggressive to where it was 150 people in the room. I'm, 18, 19 years old, still just moved up north for the first time, so still, very Southside, and it was in my face, but I was like, yo, this music is killer. I think it was Freddie Bain was playing, maybe even
Freddie
Orlando.
Bain.
Orlando was actually
Orlando,
my favorite.
Freddie Bain,
like,
Lego.
just playing just next level music, and then just helping me get over that just real quick, just culturally, and that was Red Dog for me early.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, no, this dude right here.
The grandfather.
Yeah,
Please stop.
I went to the warehouse on Randolph, and I was just 20 years old, and it was, I think in a couple of months I was turning 21, but they were being stingy and they didn't let me in, and so my friend said, "Hey man, I know this new place. I just heard of this new place," and he's like, "We come over here, and we go and we enter this place in the alley. We walk up the stairs and I open the door and the room is just whoop, just music everywhere. And I'm standing in the middle of the dance floor and I'm looking around and I'm looking for the DJ booth. And when I find the DJ booth, the DJ is pointing at me. He's got a cigarette in his hand. He's pointing at me. And I'm like, I know the DJ? And he's like, and I climb up the ladder and it's him. And yeah, after that, it was on. It was over. It was a good time. Red Dog was beautiful, especially the 2 o'clock years before they got their 4 o'clock license.
Yeah, that's when it was definitely more of a community spot.
Man, it was pagan. It was like we were dancing around a fire. Like it was like. It was just beautiful with those big open windows at the back of the room with the ambient street light and that Klipsch sound system, and I have to say, was that one of the biggest dance floors that we've seen in Chicago? Because that
Up
dance
until
floor
that point. Well, Shelter had a pretty big dance floor.
had a pretty big dance floor. Crowbar too, but I feel like Red Dog was almost all dance floor on one side of the room.
Yeah.
And it was everybody. It's like it was the first time I met a black woman. She had this bald head, she had on leather pants and a chain brassiere, and there was nothing under the chain brassiere. And I never had met anybody like that. And I was like, I'm fucking home. Yeah.
Oh my God. That just lost me completely.
Yeah.
But I love it. Sorry. Where do I go to after he just talked about a woman with
Chain brassiere.
with a chain brassiere on? Where do you go from there, actually? Yes, and that's the thing when I was getting to, and when I said that coming here was just like that's when you really started to see this thing called house culture progress into this multicultural, international feel of everything. Is that me? Testing 1 2. Okay. And like I said, it was an extension of the loft parties, which to me gave way once the rave laws and all that.
Gave all the clubs the direction that they went in the late '90s, going into the early 2000s. So.
I'll never forget. I have a story with we were at a particular loft party. It's funny because I was just bringing back so many memories. Even the first panel talking about Lit X. Lit X was the first time I ever heard of a beanie. I didn't even know what a beanie was. And this particular party, I didn't know what this was at the time, but they were walking around with a plate of cookies, right? Chocolate chip cookies. And you see, I'm a big dude, so yeah, chocolate chip cookies, have me one, right? Sure, I'll take one. As I'm grabbing the cookie, it's literally going in my mouth. This guy here runs from the other end of the room, and as it's going into my mouth, he grabs my hand like, no. I'm mad because I won't eat this cookie. That's what I found. I didn't know what edibles were. And he saved me that day because I almost ate one. So yeah, these parties would definitely had its, I remember the nitric,
Yeah, the tanks.
the tanks.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
what the hell? Why is everybody sucking on balloons? Like, what's going? Yeah.
And after you
so-
did one, you were like, why not? You know, let's
I
have
never
a
did. I never did. I've been
never did
I've been
a
straight
nitrous
laced my whole
balloon.
life. I've been straight laced my whole life.
Ought to be ashamed of yourself.
But I didn't need it. I had y'all at the music controls, like getting me high all night long. So, okay. At this point, I want to open it up to the floor and see if anybody have any kind of comments, questions, remarks, memories, or anything. Starting with Eric Williams over here. So now I'll be Vanna White.
Oh, thanks. I had a question for all three. So now, 20, 30 plus years later, you see a difference in the crowd that you're playing for. And we talked about what this did a little bit earlier. How do you get young black people into house music in a way that folks from around the world are into it, younger people, and even on the north side, you don't see it on the south side so much?
That's a big question.
Well, I think it's just a different culture overseas and even in Canada. I mean, they're playing house music, quite a bit along with commercial music on the radio. So it gets that kind of, setting initially. I mean, we did that once, but now it's pretty much, the day of the payola is still here. It's grunting. I mean, I don't mean to sound like, old man, but I mean, you just can't get the music on. It's just not,
And
no one's paying for it.
I think the death of disco had a lot to do with how black music changed. We didn't see a song, any R&B over 110 beats per minute for like 30 years. We're just starting to see R&B that clocks in over 110 beats per minute, and so like this dance music culture, with Europe, they have that unbroken line. They never, when America decided it didn't like disco anymore, Europe doesn't have that.
Yeah.
And dance music continued to progress. It's once again, it's radio. It almost replaced their rock and roll. When I was over there, I found that there was more dance music on the radio than there was, rock and roll. Even in the 90s, there was a lot of rock and roll on American radio stations. So I think, yeah, they continue to move on with the culture where America separated itself, and then it kind of came back in the 90s. But as far as getting, black kids into this, man, that's a big one, because historically, dance music has been competing with hip hop, and hip hop rules the roost in a million gazillion different ways, and we'd have to get through that kind of barrier in order to.
Well, I think for one, I think first of all, I remember Erykah Badu made a comment about hip hop and then being some corny whatever, and I think there was even a point that we forgot that even hip hop was dance music.
Initially,
Because when you go to hip hop
hip-hop
parties,
forgot it was dance music, though. You know what I'm saying?
They cut from the same cloth. They both are the children of the disco scene, right?
But hip hop wanted to separate itself because it didn't like the gay overtones that came with dance music. So it said, no, we don't want no parts of that. And in fact, went out of its way. I'll be honest with you, HBK, the great rap show that everybody talks about, had little intersections where they would get rap stars to come on and say, fuck house. You know what I'm saying? So like, hip hop separated itself from dance music, and it wanted to separate itself from dance music in a lot of ways.
I think it's something that you too that when you talk about the disco demolition and everything, and not having any R&B or 110 beats a minute at a certain point, because I think that's the reason why David Guetta made the comment he made, or they put that article out of him like. It was basically, there was an article that Channel 7 posted, and there was an interview they did with David Guetta, and basically made it seem like he was bringing house back or introduced house, whatever, because he has all these dance songs recorded by Chris Brown and Nicki Minaj and all these artists playing on the radio, because again, we hadn't had any up-tempo music in R&B in 30 years. So, and I also think when I've done quite a few lectures on different soul artists with a thing they do called River Mirror Sessions. And whenever I'm doing my research on certain artists like Shaka and Patti LaBelle, all these people, I have also noticed that when they weren't charted anymore, they were always charting UK dance charts. So, yeah, that is, yeah. So, yeah, radio definitely will play a major role in getting the youth back involved. Like, I've even noticed, even with the music of those, like whenever I've spun sets, that I've incorporated some sort of like dance version of a Miguel song or something like that, how they respond to it. Like, there's nothing in this culture that's been kind of presenting itself back to them. So it's like we need to somehow present ourselves back to this culture, because they definitely, I mean, when I think about it alone, like a lot of my friends who have teenage and young adult kids, they basically look like we did. And they would take it if we were presented back to them, but it's like, it seemed like our culture is just not passing that torch on to them.
Well, I don't think you can necessarily force feed people either. Like, it's kind of tough. I mean, we kind of chose this. We didn't really go looking for it. I don't think any of our stories, you know, we knew someone, there was a connection that kind of led us into it. You didn't just walk in to dance music just off the street, just by happenstance. You know, you had to have like a certain level of seriousness toward the music that you even like, but like anyway, like usually, at least, not saying that there aren't serious hip hop people, but the general people to where, you know, hip hop is a consensus popular music.
But we did have a hot mix at 12 every day on BMX. So we did have HBK. We did have it in the airways. We did have it to where, I mean, when I was coming in high school, even our sock hops, everything we did, it was house music, dance music.
But when did it become cool to not dance? That's the question. 1988, huh? And we've lasted this long, huh?
I have to say I'm from the probably last generation, and I was introduced through these guys. And I have to say, to piggyback, I work on the west side, and I had a dance group, and all of my girls were coming in with juke, and they were like loving this, playing Gantman, and I'm like, wait, I just saw him play the other night at Strictly 90s, but you know, I can't tell my girls that. So I really do think that house is alive in the city. It's still alive. And they'll play some classic tracks, you know, in between basketball games, and kids get up and they start dancing to it. So I still feel like it's alive. It's definitely not the hip thing per se, but it's alive.
You know, I think that kids do get into it as they get older. I think you can't miss house in Chicago. It's almost impossible to do anything here, to live a life here, and not run into some house at some point in time. And some kids find the right places and they get introduced to it. And you know, I mean, house is very much alive in Chicago, but the problem is how do we get black kids from the South Side into it?
Well, also I think too is because we have to allow them to have their part of the history, and not so much You know how it was, even with our generations, how for years, how we were shunned in this community because we weren't there. Certain places being there, certain, basically, having people's memories. I was not old enough to go to the original warehouse. I was 4. And I can't change my age to be somewhere I wasn't. You know what I'm saying? I made it to the music box at the last years and I was underage. But would I say I was a regular? No, I wasn't. But I did go to the Bismarck. I did go to the Reactor. I did go to the Powerhouse. I did go to these. There's so many other
For
spaces.
the children of that party, so
yeah,
you were there.
If I can at least start honoring youth where they are in their space, I think they will be a little bit more inclined to feel something culturally about it.
I was going to piggyback on what you were just saying, Duane, because for me in my household, it was mainly, hip hop and New Jack Swing, and if it wasn't for, my father who, my dad, just exposing me to groups like Soul in the Hole, then I would have never have known house. Like I got into house when I was like a teenager, but before then it was nothing but, Tupac and Digital Underground and, just mainly just R&B. Like house was kind of like pretty foreign to me and all of my peers, honestly. So like you were saying is that sometimes you kind of have to go where they are, because for a lot of kids, this whole world, they don't know that. Even with them being in Chicago, you have whole households that go through their whole lives not being exposed to house. So you just kind of have to you got to be where they at sometimes. Because, it would have been a whole nother story for me if my dad went and sold in the hole. So, there you go.
So, yeah, because I had spoke to some kids at After School Matters program, and they were focusing the project they were focusing on was on the race riots, the Chicago race riots. And, but they brought them by the Arts Bank, and I was to tell them about the history of Frankie Knuckles and the record collection and everything else. And a lot of them hadn't even heard of him. And when I was telling them history of, just the start of the warehouse and the things that people really didn't know, like the people really didn't know that Robert and them started doing the parties they were doing, basically out of a backlash because the white discos at the time what had black quotas and wasn't letting them in. Just from that standpoint. And then they also didn't know much about the disco demolition. Which to this day, this year is the 40th anniversary of that. And to this day, they still don't want to call that a riot, and it was very much so a riot. So just, I don't know, it's just so many things that need to be presented to them. Yeah, it was an utter attack on culture, and that's kind of why we're here. But I don't know, once I started telling the story to them from a place that they can relate to, they opened up. They opened up more. And then I even had one where then I ended up having to play music for them. I was trying to make these correlations, like I would play Mr. Finger's Mystery of Love, and then I would play Kanye's Faded because that's what it sampled. And they seemed to kind of give them some sort of context. And at some point, they didn't want to hear the Kanye no more. They was kind of more interested in the other music, but it was kind of like I had to kind of come to their world. So,
well, I think it's just as accessible now as it can be. So, but you still have to have a connection. There still has to be someone because all the other stuff is in your face first. It's on television first. It's on the radio first. So and most people are just satisfied. Most people aren't digging that deep or going that far. Most people are just satisfied, I think, with just a surface level of music. So you have to have a yearning and just to almost have an inkling someone connected you to it, and then you just kind of ask yourself questions like, well, I kind of like this is kind of, so. It's just,
I guess, from there, because they will also know that they have, I think the one thing that's been missing is the lack of options in music. When we talk about the hip hop era, and the people always want to just go, blankly called every form of rap hip hop and pigeonhole the whole culture of hip hop into this whole negative thing. And that's not the case. And even back then, the hip hop that was more risque, for every Luke, we had a Tribe Called Quest. For every Akinelli, we had a De La. For, you know what I'm saying? Just them having more options, you know?
Oh, me. I have.
She had a question too.
Oh, okay. Okay, I hand it to you. To the question about bringing the youth into it, we had a first panel with Eric and Howie, and there are so many levels and variables to what has happened that we need to be creative to how we can reintroduce them, as far as the codes, the price of getting space, as far as the technology and understanding how to properly create a space for dance music. When you go into a place and the bar is bigger than the dance floor, is it really for dancing? And then the culture, then the promotion. We don't have the rights to put on the street poles any longer. We don't have promotion crews. And residencies. You talk about residencies. A lot of places do not have a resident DJ who can manage and create and curate music to particularly that space, okay? Connections to the high schools. Most of those guys and the DJs had connections to high schools and or colleges. You know what I'm saying? So there's so many ways that we saw what happened to us. We know we can click to that or connect to that and reintroduce young folks to that music. And it's also a thing called maturity. You know, when I was going to Mendel High School, then a lot of the music they were playing was upbeat, whatever, you know, but when Frankie Knuckles came there, he bored the shit out of me. Until he played one song that came on that blew my freaking mind. It was Let's Get Together, Pam Todd. I was like, what in the hell is this? And it just took me on this journey. Sometimes it could be that song, sometimes it could be that space that a young person walk into and like, what's happening here? Like going inside of Red Dogs. Sometimes it's just be interesting to see that poster on the pole that says, Bismarck, Lil Lewis. Okay, let me check this out. You know, it's so many things that hurt us that says the young whites coming in, getting too high and drunk and ODing and said loft party, rave party, codes, clothes. You know what I'm saying? So it's a lot of things that happen to us, but there's a lot of things that we have learned to reintroduce the young folks to get them energized back into that space, because a lot of the times you really think about it, music played not so much as a bigger part as we think. Like you said, everybody had the same records, but walking to the music box, then walking into Sours, or Sawyers, they want to say, was a different atmosphere. Can you say it, right? Is the sound system, the whole different space. So there's a lot of variables that we can use to our advantage to energize them. Don't ignore them, because they will reinterpret your shit till you hate it. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
I wanted to recognize the potency of the work that you were describing you had done with the students, because historically, hip hop, we already have a context of it being a tool for resistance. We know the context that hip hop and that form has given the youth that built it up until now, and the power of giving historicizing house as another tool for resistance and a tool to kind of reactivate that creative process, and being able to educate anyone who listens on the historic, the association, like the polyrhythmic roots, and associating that with the African origins of what makes us dance. And I think that continuing to push that aspect of house as its own form and its own, again, potential for rebuilding and being used and even upcycled as another format to be able to cause change and to be able to bring even more culture in addition to what has already been developed and has evolved. I think that's very powerful, is again recontextualizing and this moment right here of, giving a nice history of what it was, what it is, and what it has the power to be, because we already know, again, the history of hip hop. Not everyone has that context to be able to understand how house can be what it has built itself up to be, so.
When I think about going to house parties when I was younger, one of the biggest things, like you mentioned, the woman who had the chains on and all those things, I think today's society, you don't have to hide your freak. It's like you walk down the street and you can kind of see it. And one thing about house parties, it was underground, and that's where all those people showed those things, where they were expressing their inner, they were releasing all their inhibitions. So I don't know if you go to a house party now, where do you see people releasing their inhibitions? Or where can people release their inhibitions?
I almost think that's kind of impossible, just because of the fact of the everybody with their phones and the cameras everywhere. You don't want to be on someone else's page. You don't want, there's just too much on the line, whereas back then, cameras, no one was thinking about anything, so you didn't have to worry about you had that space, and whatever happened in that space was in that space. So, and that was.
I think that's why Kahari B created the debauchery ball. And I think you're probably going to see a little bit more of that. I'm actually doing a party where we're looking for a new space. It's supposed to have been this Thursday, but there's another party coming up. I think you're going to kind of see more of that, because that phone thing, I started throwing myself a separate birthday party in December, because the one birthday party I should do with the DJ crew that I deal with, a lot of people that would come to hear me play that's from the house culture kind of felt like they would end up being a spectacle. Because of the way they dress and the way they would dance freely, and all of a sudden the whole room is crowding them with their phones, and everybody's trying to record this moment instead of actually being in the moment with them. And so I end up throwing myself a separate party just so they can have a space where that won't happen. So yeah, it's just a matter of more promoters, more people creating spaces where they have those kind of no phone rules or no kind of different things to, for people can feel like not a spectacle, basically.
I play a series of parties called Freak Easy here. They are the release your inhibition.
Where is that?
Party.
I ain't never heard of that.
that's exactly. Exactly. That's the whole point of it, yeah. Diz's played some, and I've seen Terry at more than a few Freak Easies. Yeah. So, and it actually, but those kids are really from the burner community, the Burning Man community. So, they're inclined to take off their clothes anyway. So, but yeah, it still exists. There are places where people do let go of their inhibitions for real, but you have to find those places. Those places aren't supposed to come to you. That's what makes them special, the fact that you have to be the kind of person that's looking for that. And I think that that's one of the special parts of house, is that sometimes you have to look for house and it doesn't necessarily come to you. And I think in that way, house, it really, it lives in the same space as jazz. Because jazz doesn't just come to you. You have to go to it, and in a lot of ways, the fact that you have to go to it makes house somehow resonate deeper inside of people. Once they fall in love with it, they never ever let it go. And I think that the fact that sometimes everything is given to us nowadays on a silver platter, quick, fast, and hurry, and the fact that you have to go find it or you run into it because of the kind of person that you are, I think that kind of does actually make it really special in a lot of ways.
So I'm not looking to be naked nowhere, but I do love that freedom.
I
I just wanted to ask if you guys could talk about or what you're thinking about connecting to like, and you're probably doing it already, but connecting to the spaces where, or the people who are still like pushing house forward, like Ray Chardonnay and Party Noir and Debauchery Ball. And really, this whole conversation of spaces is one that I'm interested in, because the fact is we had spaces. I can't say that for teenagers I work with now. Like, there's nowhere for them to go without being carted. And curfew, we didn't have curfews until 1990, so we could be out all night long, multiple different spaces. So I mean, my real question is about, can you guys talk about how you might be or thinking about connecting to some of the younger, the folks who have 10, 20, 30 years on you, who are who are trying to evolve house or trying to introduce young people into house? Because I feel like house is alive, but I also feel like there's a disconnect, that young people listen to that music, but they don't know where it comes from. They don't know anything behind it. They just know that their mama played it one day, and that they like it, or they hear it on GCI or V103 from time to time. But like making that connection, like I'm a teacher, so we talk about this stuff all the time, like to get a student to connect to the material as something that's theirs, something that's part of their history as a Chicagoan, as a Black Chicagoan, as a South Side Chicagoan, or even as a West Side or North Side Chicagoan. So that's what I'm asking.
I mean, just, you were saying that, and I never even thought about that, the fact that you have V103, you have these radio stations that actually are playing like house music or disco or whatever, which probably for about 20 years you didn't really have on the radio, maybe outside of B96, and that's just kind of another thing. So there is a disconnect that you're talking about. It's kind of a generation, because maybe some people, the 2000 generation, for the most part, at least the way I look at it, you know, they did something completely different. So the generation you're speaking of now is really 2 generations removed from us. So it's almost not really appropriate for me to really approach them. They kind of have to find us. Just, you know, it's just kind of weird. I'm not going to be in a place with 24, 25-year-old people just looking for, you know, 45 years old. That's not really, you know, for why am I here, you know? So, but they have their thing, you know? They have their thing, and, you know, if I'm back into a situation, I'm at a party, hey, great, and people meet naturally that way, that's fantastic. That's how I've met everyone in Chicago up to this point, so. And they're younger people starting on their journey, perhaps, you know, maybe something that they'll do for years and they'll have 20 years like we have now. So, you know, people just kind of cross paths organically if they stick to it for a long period of time.
Actually, I have those millennials that have found me. Like you said, it's like just being in my space, and like you said, them having to come, they found me. I didn't find them. But it also had everything to do with me having residencies, having somewhere they can find me on a regular basis. And then once they were in my space, me honoring their presence and thinking what I can do musically to bring them into the fold. That's the kind of DJ I am when it comes down to, you know, I like to read the room and know who's in the room and know what I have in my repertoire that will activate the room. So, yeah, that's all I got for it.
I think hip hop actually appeals to how Black folks live their lives a lot more than dance music does in a lot of ways. Because it actually is talking. You know, there's not a lot of talking in a lot of dance music. There may be some singing, but hip hop is saying, hey man, I wake up in the morning and I ain't got no money. You know, my mama ain't got no money. They fighting in the streets, you know, and here we are over here like, house, yay, house, you know what I'm saying? I think that hip hop does actually speak, so it's harder for us to get to them because of a lot of our content, you know, but I do think as they get older, as they hit their early 20s, it becomes easier for them to hear dance music. And one of the other problems I've encountered is a lot of people can't walk and chew gum at the same time. I can't, if I like hip hop, I can't like house. If I like house, I can't like hip hop. You know, I fucking love hip hop, you know, all the way through. You know, from ultramagnetic MCs all the way up into, you know, like Schoolie D, just, you know, super rapping, all that stuff. I grew up with it because when I grew up going to the record store buying house, the other wall at the record store was hip hop. And when I spent all the money, you know, everything I could on house, and I had money left over, I bought hip hop. So there's this idea that you can't like a dog and a cat at the same time, you know, like people can no longer walk and chew gum at the same time, and I think that that's another problem. Everybody has to be stuck on one side or the other, you know.
So that's a perfect segue to our next panel, but I'm going to take this one last question from Allende.
Yeah, so I just noticed a parallel in those two parts of your response. One, that like house is like jazz, go to it. And then you're like, I play for lots of young people. It's no black people though. So I was thinking about the way that like that happened with jazz, right? Like, and so I'm just, it's not necessarily a question that can be answered, but it made me think about, as cultural workers and producers, what responsibilities are there to make sure you're still showing up in places where, what we talked about a little, what some of the other folks talked about, and going to where young black folks are, from the first question through this whole thread. So I'm just thinking about that.
I can dig it. Believe me, that brother always has something profound on his mind. Anyway, we're going to end this panel right here. This at this moment, Stephen. Can you tell us what you're working on?
Well, currently, I mean, I produce dance music under Diz, under Bertha, under Diz and Diz, under a band called The Freaks, based out of London. I play, you know, a fair amount in the city, but I don't have any consistent places I play weekly. So I travel quite a bit through states and country. What's that? iTunes, Discogs, you can buy TrackSource, Beatport, myriad of online places.
And I don't really work around on a weekly basis. I'm producing music under DJ Freak, under my label, Leah Music, available all digital, retail, Spotify, streaming.
Yeah, I've made a few records, but I'm not much of a producer. I just like DJing, and you know, I play the place Carabellia fairly monthly, and I get a lot of freelance work. You know, the summer's coming. We're playing West Fest. You know, there's lots of gigs I got booked.
July 5th, 6th, and 7th.
Yeah.
West Fest Festival.
Yeah, I'm Saturday. You're
Friday.
And you know, my Facebook page, if you want to know where I'm playing, my Facebook page is open. You can go and figure it out. And that's about it. Yeah. You have money, I will play.
And that's probably a perfect entryway if we want to talk about access, an access point where, if anyone wants to go, West Fest is the great introduction outside to see house music in the city of Chicago, to see diversity. Like, that's where to go.
It's on the same day as Chosen Few, ain't it?
But it's Sunday, and day thing, night thing, or and that's not every year. Every year they have a rental the same weekend every year. So
Yeah.
Chosen Few will be there next year. West Fest will be there next year as well. You got choices. That's good.
All righty, well, we're gonna strike the set and get ready. For the next panel, we're gonna take like a 5-minute or so intermission and get ready for, the next panel was about the Four Corners. I call it the Four Corners, hip hop, house, acid jazz, and its intersections. So that's gonna be a very great conversation as well with Miss Fathom DJ over there, Jesse De La Pena, DeRoe. So it's gonna be dope, so please stay for that one.
Thank you guys for listening to us.